Well, in my morning reading, I have been working through a one-year Bible. And if you're not familiar with that, it has a little bit of reading from the Old Testament, the New Testament, and then a Psalms of David. And one of the stories I've been reading through is all about the children of Israel crossing the Jordan River into the Promised Land. And I know that story comes with a few modern problems with it in terms of how we look back at it. But I want today talk about some unique things that I realized really do apply to our recovery from porn behaviors. So if you're up for a bit of a Bible walkthrough, bear with me. After all, I have been a pastor for 30 years, so occasionally I slip into a little bit of Bible teaching. So I thought today we would talk about learning warfare, porn as your enemy. Welcome aboard.
Guys ready?
When it comes to porn, are you stuck, spinning out, or slipping backwards in your life? If so, then welcome to the Finding Traction podcast, a show dedicated to those who are looking to gain recovery momentum away from porn and toward the life and relationships they have always hoped for. Now, here's your host, Vern Tomke.
Well, as we head into the fall, or we're now, firmly into the fall, let me just say that if you are looking for some practical help in walking out of porn behaviors towards a much better and much freer life, I really encourage you to sign up to the Circle Learning platform. You will see a sign up on the show notes, and it is a great place for you to get a whole bunch of free resources, worksheets, planning tools, to really get your head around some of the steps that are going to be needed to really be successful in this journey of recovery. Another thing that I really do believe that's needed for you to be successful is to work with a group of guys. And on the Circle Learning platform, you'll also get information about our Finding Traction course, the 52-week video course, as well as some of the Finding Traction groups that we're regularly starting and constantly adding guys to. So again, if you want more information about that, or you just want to connect with me for maybe a free Zoom call and talk to me a little bit more about recovery, my email is bandofbrothers.care@gmail.com. Well, let's get back to this Old Testament story about the children of Israel crossing over the Jordan River. They've been wandering in the desert for 40 years, if you know your story. And at the end of Joshua, really the whole book of Joshua is around how Moses sets them up for success. And he gives them this talk before they step into the Promised Land. And essentially his talk is, you are going to be crossing the Jordan. You're going to be going into the land of Canaan. And the message is really simple. Don't make friends with the people that already exist in the land. Don't intermarry with them. Don't accommodate them in any way, because if you do so, they will prove to be a snare to you, and you will end up worshiping their gods. Well, it sounds pretty interesting, sounds pretty straightforward, and I know it raises a lot of interesting questions from today's vantage point of moving in and taking over land. But I'm not here as either an apologist or a skeptic today. I am simply looking at this story and want to share some principles that stood out to me as I have been reading through it. So if you're not familiar with the story, what happens is the children of Israel, the 12 tribes, cross the Jordan River from east to west, and then they begin to clear out the Canadian. Yeah, there we go. That's an interesting retelling. Let's try that again. The Canaanite armies who stood in their way. the seven nations that were in that area. And at some point, they secured themselves in the land, and they're described as having peace on all sides. So they move into the land, they begin to secure themselves. So they really start with a beachhead, and then eventually they really get settled in the land. But if you've read the story, you know that isn't the end of the story. You then read that Joshua divides up the land to each of the tribes, well, except the Levites, that's another story. And he says, this is your land. Now, what is your territory still has lots of enemy occupants in it, but it is your job to take that land, to clear out the enemies, and establish yourself as the sole occupant of your new territory. Now get to it. You tracking so far? I know you're going to ask, so how did that go? Well, do you want the good news first or the bad news? Well, let's start with the good news. Or let's, at least look at some of the positive lessons we can learn from this story around our recovery. The first guy that I love in this story is a dude called Caleb. Now, first of all, Caleb was one of the 10 spies who went in, and unlike his compatriots, he didn't see any overwhelming challenges in taking his enemy on. I mean, sure, there was giants in the land, but for him, it was like, God is with us. We can do this thing. And along with Joshua, I was like, man, let's go, guys. Let's do this. Of course, you know the story, that the other one said, no, we can't do this. The cities are too big. They're walled. There's giants in the land. They're looking down on us. We seem like grasshoppers in their eyes, and we're never going to be able to do this. And the very first thing I would say is this. I love Caleb because Caleb saw the challenge as something with the help of God that he could, and along with the rest of the people, they could be victorious in. And so many guys, when I start this journey of recovery, they may have 5, 10, 15, 20 years where they've never been able to conquer their giants. They've never been able to say, you know what, I actually believe that I can see porn in my life evicted once and for all, where it no longer will bully me. It will no longer take my lunch money. It will no longer take from all the good things that I want for my life, but it stands in the way of that. And so many people live defeated lives and they just go, I'll never be able to really move forward in this area because porn is just too big. It's too strong. And that's just the way it is. And so that's the first thing that I learned from the example of Caleb. Caleb goes, no. We can do this thing. Well, if you know the story of Caleb, Caleb comes back into the picture. 40 years later, the entire generation dies in the wilderness, and now they're back at the Jordan River 40 years later. And Caleb, once again, 40 or 45 years later, says this. He says, I was 40 years old when Moses, the servant of the Lord, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to explore the land. And I brought him back a report according to my convictions. But my fellow Israelites who went up with me made the hearts of the people melt in fear. I, however, followed the Lord my God wholeheartedly. So he's retelling what had happened 40 years previously. Now, listen to this, a whole generation later. Now then, just as the Lord promised, he has kept me alive 45 years since the time he said this to Moses, while Israel moved about in the wilderness. So here I am today, 85 years old. I am still as strong today as the day Moses sent me out. I'm just as vigorous to go out to battle now as I was then. Now give me this hill country that the Lord promised me that day. You yourselves heard then that the Anakites, those were the giants of the land, the Anakites were there, and their cities were large and fortified. But the Lord helping me, I will drive them out, just as he said. I mean, dude, this guy is 85 years old. It reminds me, I sometimes get these internet pictures on the side of my search engine, and they're these old guys, they got to be in their 70s or 80s, and they're completely ripped. They've got this six-pack. They look like they had the body of 45-year-olds. Now, maybe you don't get them. Maybe it's just my algorithm, because the computer wants me to think that I can look like that. But I probably never will, no matter how many times I go to the gym. Okay, I'm getting off track here. But this is the reason, and this is why I love the story of Caleb. It is never too late to go after your enemies. It's like you don't get any dimming of his warfare passion, his desire for battle. I mean, I've worked with guys in their 60s and 70s, not in their 80s yet, maybe that's coming, but who've spent a whole life steeped in porn. And they go, you know what? It's not too late for me. I want to make a new start for my own sake, the sake of my wife, or the sake of my kids, or the sake of my grandkids. Now, there's regret that perhaps they didn't start this much sooner, but they're not saying I'm too old to actually confront the giants in my life. So the next time you think you're too old or the giants are too big or too strong, I'd love you to think of Caleb here. So that's the first guy that comes to my mind when I think of this whole idea of learning battle. So we're on the good news, don't forget. So Caleb is our first good news story. Now, the second good news thing I think we can learn is how well the tribes work together to accomplish their goals. Now, I know Caleb talked about the help of God, but we also could add here, and probably should have added, with the help of God and the support of other men. Now, if you know the story, initially 2.5 tribes decided to stay on the east side of the Jordan River. They had defeated the enemies there, and they looked around and said, you know what, this land looks good and promising. I think we're going to take this land. But they also said, we are not going to simply stay here and not work to support you. What they said is, we will cross over the Jordan and help you. This is the way it reads. We will arm ourselves for battle and go ahead of the Israelites until we have brought them to their place. We will not return to our homes until each of the Israelites has received their inheritance. Isn't that a great story? It's like, no. It's not just about us. It's also about helping the other tribes receive their inheritance. And as the story goes on and you read, you see other tribes being inspired by the same atmosphere, the same attitude of working together. For one place it says, the men of Judah said to their relatives from the tribe of Simeon, join with us to fight against the Canaanites living in the territory allotted to us. Then we will help you conquer your territory. So the men of Simeon went with Judah. It's a huge component of how we are wired to live and how we are wired to fight. We fight next to our brothers. That is where the strength is. Nobody goes to war on their own. If they do, they won't last very long. They go with a squad. They go with a platoon. They go and they fight alongside their brothers. I have seen this over and over again in our Finding Traction groups, where the group strength adds to the individual strength in the group. It literally becomes what they say in AA, we can do what I can't. I mean, that's the thing that I love to see, the camaraderie, the support. when one person falls, we all pick them up. We take encouragement from other people's victories. And it's like the group saying, we will not rest until each of us has received our inheritance. Each of us has received and is experiencing the life and freedom that God has for us and we're striving for. So those are just some great positive recovery little things that I learned from this story. But, of course, we know the rest of the story, and now we need to turn to some of the lessons we learned from the bad side or the disappointing or discouraging part of the stories. Near the end of Joshua's life, we see that things have not quite gone according to plan. The plan that Moses called them to way back at the beginning, he says, this is how you do it. This is how you got to do it. You got to go in, you got to clear out these nations. You got to take the land. You've got to, when you get your territory, you get your allotment, you have to take it over completely. And some of the tribes had taken their land, but others could not accomplish or chose not to. For example, some said, well, we can't do this because they have iron chariots and we don't have iron chariots. So as a result, we're not able to take our land. Other tribes were content to simply turn the nations that were there, the Canaanite nations, into a conscripted workforce for them. Because, hey, why move them out if we can just get them to do all of our future work for us, work we no longer have to do? It's a win-win, right? And so for a variety of reasons, you have tribes that were given land, they chose not to, or they felt they could not drive out their enemies and take over the land that was supposed to be theirs. So then we come up to this rather challenging and sobering rebuke that the angel of the Lord gives to the various tribes when he confronts their unwillingness to drive out the enemies from their territories. Listen to what the angel of the Lord says in Judges 2. It says, so now I declare that I will no longer drive out the people living in your land. They will be thorns in your side, and their gods will be a constant temptation to you. When the angel of the Lord finished speaking to all the Israelites, the people wept loudly. I mean, this was the worst possible news. It was cause for weeping. You mean we're not going to be able to remove the enemies, and because we were unwilling to do it. So, here is my obvious recovery lesson, and one I think you can probably see coming. If we choose to not drive out those things that will derail us by design, if instead we make agreements with those things, we try to accommodate them in our lives, we try to do a softer, gentler approach to our recovery, we will never experience true freedom or our version of the promised land. Now, let me be completely candid with you. I don't always want to live free from porn or even its pseudo substitutes. I can't say every day I have this overwhelming desire to please God or walk in purity or holiness or whatever word you want to use. I'm just saying. But one thing I am interested in is self-interest. And one thing I hate is living under constant temptation. I mean, it truly sucks, doesn't it? And it's a horrible way to spend a day where you are fighting temptation all day. So simply out of self-interest, I do everything I can to avoid that reality. Whether it's to be pure or some less than pure reason, I just don't want to live that way. And whatever I can do to keep that contested place in my life, I mean, I really try to do. Let me give you an example. The other day, I was watching my 8 football games. That's another story, but I watch a whole bunch of football games at once. I have a package up here in Canada that lets me do that. And I was watching this one game, and for some reason, it's never happened before. On the game, it came, to time to go to advertisement, and an advertisement came on for an adult website. It's the only time it's happened, but there was a specific name of it, and it was surprising, it was unexpected, and it just was like a bit of a shot to the solar plexus, and I want to see what that website is. I mean, I know the name of a dozen other websites, but that one was new. That one was novel. And I spent the next hour in watching football going, gee, I want to see what will happen. I mean, I at least want to type it in and see if it, Covenant Eyes blocks it or whatever. And it was just this obsessive thought. And so I was thinking, you know what? I know what to do with this. I know how to fight this. And I am so thankful for Covenant Eyes. I simply, we got on Covenant Eyes, and I simply went on my block list, and I typed, the name of the website. I did a .ca and a .com just to make sure I caught both sides of the border. And I went, ha, it's gone. You're no longer in my sight. I no longer have to battle with you. I no longer have to deal with the constant temptation of wanting to check out what you have to offer. So, for me, it's just a practical little example of going, I hate constant temptation. And to think that I am leaving constant temptation in my life by my unwillingness to remove things that I can constantly go back to. I know guys that do that. I hear that all the time. I'm going, I don't want to live that way. For me, that's not a peaceful, there's no serenity in that. So take it from me, I guess, in that story. All right. So let me throw one wrench into this story. And I've been teaching the Bible for 30 years. And at times, I will be honest, it does get confused. It's confusing. And just when you think you have a nice, clear narrative, something comes up, or there's a verse, or there's something which kind of throws, a wrench in the thing, and you go, well, how does that fit? So let me share this story, how what happens, because as you read the story and you see the death of Joshua, and then the next generation of Israelites that follow Joshua, there is this passage and these verses that don't quite seem to fit this nice, clean recovery story. Here it is. This is the Lord speaking. He says, "These are the nations that the Lord left in the land to test those Israelites who had not experienced the wars of Canaan. He did this to teach warfare to the generations of Israelites who had no experience in battle." So earlier, it seemed like God was saying, because you didn't clean out or clear out your enemies, I am going to leave them. And the results of that, the negative result of your unwillingness, is they will continue to be a constant source of temptation to you. You should have driven them out, right? But now in these verses, he seems to be saying, well, it was my idea to leave some of these enemies around to test you and train you, especially the next generation in warfare. And you're going, well, how does that fit? And there's a tension there, right? And I'm not sure I can completely square that circle, other than to say I think we need to learn from both of these lessons and both of these realities. First of all, yes, We are to clear out the enemy as much as within our control. We are to clear out the enemies in our lives, those temptations, those things which constantly seek to lure us or pull us away or constantly knock on our door. And at the same time, there will always be some aspect of the enemy or something we have to fight against that will remain as a test. We will still need to practice warfare. We never get to a place where warfare is completely done. Yes, we're not to accommodate anything which seeks to destroy us, but we never are able to completely leave a fighting posture, a warfare posture. Because if we had peace on all sides, we probably would become proud and self-satisfied and having all the answers, right? The presence of enemies in our lives, and as they remain in our lives, it causes us to stay vigilant, but it also leaves us, one, deeply aware of our weakness and vulnerability, and two, it leaves us reliant and dependent on the strength of God and the support of other men. And hopefully, we never leave those two things. At least that's the way I see it. Those are some of the lessons that I guess I picked up. So hopefully, if you didn't get your Sunday morning teaching, will have helped you, and also hopefully given you some ideas to help in your recovery as well. We'll see you next time.